God. So I think we were on page 56, right? Maybe we read a little bit of it, but it's a paragraph that begins with the Sabbath is not just another day of the week. And this book is 56, bottom of 56. The Sabbath is not just another day of the week. So just to recap very quickly, maybe from the beginning. So we said holiness is everything that belongs to the realm that can't be explained scientifically, intellectually. We said that the source of holiness, of course, is God, and He is the one that defines things as holy. We don't have that power, therefore He can decide that Mount Sinai is not holy, and therefore it's not holy, even though the most majestic event in Jewish history happened on Mount Sinai. But He did decide that Temple Mount is holy, and therefore Temple Mount is holy. So when God confers the term holiness upon something, that something becomes holy. And we said that there are three different dimensions that we live in, and in all of these three dimensions we find the idea of holiness. The first one is, of course, this world, or in Hebrew it's olam, shana, nefesh, this world. And we said time also. There are different times that are considered holy, like Shabbat, like holidays. And then nefesh, the soul of every human being, is also holy. And it's up to us to draw down this holiness from God to those three dimensions. To, again, the world, time, and soul. We also we went into more specifics because we said that God's holiness also is manifested through different attributes. And when speaking of time, for example, we say that every day of the week has a different attribute, and it's up to us to connect to that attribute in order to be able to best draw down God's holiness through that attribute. So, for example, Shabbat is a holy day, and I think this paragraph is going to speak about Shabbat a little bit. So when we make it holy and when we do what God wants us to do on a Shabbat, then we are able to draw down the holiness of the Shabbat through the attribute of Shabbat, which is holiness, or even rest, reconnecting, or introspection. We spoke about Tuesday. Tuesday is a good day to do business deals, if you remember right, or things like that, because Tuesday is a day of in which God said Ki Tov, it was good twice. There's a double portion of holiness on Tuesday, of goodness on Tuesday, and therefore we want to be able to draw down God's goodness, the holiness that comes through His double portion of goodness on Tuesday. So we do things that can bring upon that double portion of goodness, like closing deals and things like that. So every day, it's not just holiness in general, but every day is a different channel to that holiness, represented by the different attributes of God. Now he'll be speaking about Shabbat. So that now Rabbi Sternz is still focusing on the time dimension, right? We spoke of the world dimension before, and he'll speak a little more also about the soul dimension. But the world dimension, we said that the temple is the holy place in the world. Through the temple, God's holiness resides in this world, or is drawn down to this world. That's why when we pray, we face the temple. That's where really the reception, we said, is the highest. Reception to God is the highest. That's when the place in this world, the olam, that place in this world that draws down holiness, and from it, that holiness spreads to the rest of the world. Anyhow, now continuing in the dimension of time to speak of the holiness that's manifested through different attributes, but more particularly on the Shabbat. The Shabbat is not just another day of the week. Does anyone want to read? Please.
The Shabbat is not just another day of the week, nor even a special day. It sums up the week and gives meaning to it. The weekdays are marked by the act of creation, ever repeated by the descent of the divine plenty into the world. And parallel to this descent, it is man's function during the week, in the order of things, to fix and to set the world right, wherever it tends to go wrong. Oh, I wish. Right. This includes correcting the world in the physical sense, by work and action on the external frame, and in the spiritual sense, perfecting the world by performing mitzvot. For in the realm of the human soul, man's work on himself, his constant correcting of faults and spurring to activity of his inner being, constitutes a ceaseless creative
Right. So I'm going to focus on this entire paragraph, but let's take it a line at a time. When Rabbi Stans here writes that the Shabbat is not just another day of the week, it sums up the week and gives meaning to it. In the words of the Zohar, the Zohar, the famous book of Kabbalah, says that Minei mitbarchin kulo yomin, that from the Shabbat all of the weekdays are blessed. The Shabbat is also compared to the seed of a tree. So you have everything of the tree in the seed. Everything that the tree will sprout is already within the seed. When the seed is planted, then that seed finds different expressions. It creates a trunk, it creates branches, leaves, fruits, and so on. But everything really was in the seed. That Shabbat is like the seed. The weekdays are like the manifestations of the tree. So you have a weekday that looks like a trunk, and you have another Tuesday might look like a branch, and Wednesday you might produce a fruit. But everything was in the seed. And that's Shabbat. Shabbat is that seed. And that's why on Shabbat, what we ought to do, that's why Shabbat is also the day of holiness, but what we ought to do on Shabbat is connect to that seed. Connect to the very root of our creation, to ourselves, to our souls. And then we're able to also function on a more effective and maybe richer level throughout the weekdays when that soul will find expression in the day-to-day world, in the weekday world. I will say also that it's interesting because the name for Shabbat has multiple meanings, but Shabbat means rest, right? We find that in the Torah, that God rested. Shabbat vayinafash, we say in the Kiddush. God rested and He paused and He rested. But Shabbat also means something else. You know what Shabbat means? The Kabbalists explain that Shabbat comes from the word shebo, that is in it. Shebo. So what that means is that everything is in it. Like that seed, everything is in it. That which is in. That's what Shabbat means. Shebo. Everything is in that seed. And really, when we're able to tune into ourselves on Shabbat, then also our weekday looks different. I think it's very true. Shabbat elevates us, and then we're able to recharge and then go back. Right, the root is shin bet taf, which is the word. But you can have the derivative of that word, I would say, is shebo. You can use, there's a word within the Shabbat, which means that is in it. Shebo shin bet vav. Shabbat is shin bet taf, but shebo is shin bet vav. Again, relating to the seed that Shabbat is. Everything is in it. The word is Shabbat in the Torah. Ani shovet. Shovet, which is interesting because what? Son. So in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, when you have a strike, the strikes are called shvita. Ani shovet, shvita. But that's what Shabbat means. Shabbat is not just rest. It's when I'm on strike. I pause everything. I take a complete break from work. Just like strike. No, it doesn't sound good. You're right. But that's what it means. So it's not just the rest where I'm taking a siesta and then I'm going to go right back to work. But it's really where I'm putting everything on hold. Work doesn't belong to me now. Now I'm in a different realm. That's right. They don't count. We call them by names. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so on. Right. God calls them Yom Rishon, which means the first day. Yom Sheni means the second day. It's not a Monday. You're right.
So
because
the only day we're waiting for is
Shabbat.
Is Shabbat.
That's right. That's correct. Because that's the center, the epicenter of the week. From it comes everything. And that's why there's so much emphasis on it. You know, there's many stories in the Talmud how sages would prepare Shabbat. But there's a story, I think, about Reish Lakish, one of the Talmudic sages, who would go out to the marketplace on Monday. If he would find a good piece of meat, say this piece is for Shabbat, and he would store it. But then he would go out again on Tuesday just in case there was a better piece of meat. And he would find a better piece of meat, and he would say, oh, this is going to be the piece on Shabbat. We go to the marketplace every day to prepare for Shabbat, to try and find that ultimate piece of meat. But the focus of the week is indeed Shabbat. Our entire mindset is geared towards the Shabbat. Why? Because it's the seed of it all. If we ignore the seed, then we'll ignore the tree. So we have to understand that the more we nourish the seed, the more the tree will look better. And will not just look better, will be better. So I think that's why there's so much emphasis on Shabbat. That's why also, I think we spoke about it last time, but that's why on Shabbat we're given a second soul. Right? On Shabbat, there's the Shabbat soul that enters our body. I think that explains, by the way, why there's this rush after Shabbat, and especially in Israel. I grew up in Israel as a teenager, and every Saturday night, I think in this country too, Saturday night is like the night of partying. But in Israel, you can't say it's because the next day is Sunday, and Sunday you don't do anything anyway, so you can sleep in. In Israel, you can't sleep in. Sunday is a regular work day. The day where that is considered a little bit like a Sunday in Israel is a Friday. It's not a Sunday. Yet on Saturday night, still, people go out as if there's no tomorrow. I think that's because there's a void that was created in themselves, in their bodies. They're searching to fill it. Why is there a void? Because the second soul of Shabbat left. And now they feel empty within. So let's go to this bar, and let's go to that party, and let's do this. Let's try and fill it. That's why, I think we mentioned this, but that's why. Tuesday. And you keep searching it and searching it, and then Shabbat comes, and now you can rest. Now you can go on strike. Yeah. That's right. But I will say that's why we have the Haftalah. Part of the Haftalah is smelling the spices, the blessing on the Besamim, in order to comfort the soul at its state. Smell comforts souls. And that's why we have the Besamim. But again, so the Shabbat gets a recharge also through that second soul. And with that recharge, we then can go back to the weekday and face it and draw down the different attributes, as mentioned before. It happens with instruments. Instruments need to be fine-tuned, right? How often do you fine-tune your piano? Already? Well, yeah. Well, then the human instrument has to be fine-tuned once a week. And that's really the Shabbat. I heard Rabbi Steinsaltz, going back, I heard Rabbi Steinsaltz relating to the Shabbat, and I know there's some questions, I'll take them in a second, but just this point comes to mind. Beautifully, speaking of music, he said that really what makes music, as Claude Debussy says, is the silence between the notes. Everyone can play the notes, but it's how you deal with the silence between the notes. He said that's Shabbat. If you can't walk on that silence, your music will be terrible. So Shabbat, you're silent. Focus on that silence between the notes. I want to add one thing, and that is that, it's interesting, speaking of the different weekdays and Shabbat and the different attributes that they each have. So based on that, until this very day, in the Siddur, if you open any Siddur, you'll see that there's a psalm for each day. Each of those psalms really relates to the attribute of that day. What's the psalm of the Shabbat, which is what this paragraph is speaking about? It's Psalm 90, which is the Psalm of Zmor Shir Yom HaShabbat, Tov L'Odot L'Hashem, the song for the day of Shabbat. That's what it's called. It was apparently composed by Adam. Adam, who experienced the first Shabbat. He was created a few hours before Shabbat on a Friday, or not on Friday because it doesn't have names, on the sixth day. And then he was led into the Shabbat, the first Shabbat of history, and he composed the song on the first Shabbat. What's interesting, speaking of that analogy of the seed, what's interesting is that this psalm speaks a lot about the tzaddik, the righteous person, and how the very last verses of the psalm is tzaddik katamar ifrach ke'erez. Maybe I'll just read it from the English, but it speaks of how the tzaddik, who's so connected to the Shabbat, is a tzaddik, is a righteous person. Why? Because he doesn't seek to be nourished from the outside. His nourishment comes from his roots. And the deeper he goes, the more flourishing he becomes, the more fresh he becomes. It's a beautiful psalm. Yes, Psalm 90. I'll read the last verses to you. Sorry, it's 92. Psalm 92. Psalm 92. So these are the last verses. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Planted, again, just pay attention here to how much the emphasis is on the planting, on the roots. Planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green, proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him. Again, so when we're planted in that seed, in the Shabbat, that's when we can grow. That's when we can become righteous. But if you don't have an anchor to be planted in, the root that is nourished, then really you get lost. Then your instrument becomes off tune. And that's the beauty of the Shabbat, to really return to that very essence.
Or not.
Very good.
And I just,
And have strong roots, right?
when you
Right.
said that, I could just
Exactly.
feel that.
Just like the righteous. The roots is in the Shabbat. That's correct. Right. Very good. Speaking about that, I just, Shabbat connotes so many ideas, but again, they're all connected to this major essential idea. It's interesting to note, and it's a halacha, that's why I'm stating this, but that it is a mitzvah to have an intimate relationship with your spouse on Shabbat, on Friday night. Why? Because that is the day that represents that seed of creation, the root of it all. So when you are engaged in creating a seed, a root, a new tree, but you're engaged in creating that root of the tree, then it is synchronized, that action is synchronized with the root of Hashem, Shabbat. And therefore that creation is holy. So that's the idea of the Shabbat. Now, and then once we're given, I'm just reminded of a different story, but I've shared this with you. But I remember that when I lived in Italy, the wife of the chief rabbi of Italy is a remarkable woman by the name of Basi Gorelik. She's been in Italy now for over 60 years. She must be 80 plus. But she's actually from America, from New York. And when she moved to Italy, a teacher of hers came to her and said, I think you and your husband are making a terrible mistake. You live here in New York. You're moving to Italy where there's no Judaism whatsoever. You'll assimilate very quickly. You think you can go and build a Jewish community, that would be too strong, too powerful for you. The waves of the outside will completely destroy you. And then the teacher used an analogy and said it's like taking hot water and mixing it with cold water. Eventually the hot water becomes cold. You're right now boiling, you're hot, but when you go to Italy, you have cold waters there, and they'll make you cold. And she said powerfully, she said, it's true, you're right. If you take hot water and you mix it with cold water, it becomes cold. But if the hot water remains on the fire, you can add as much cold water as you want. It will always be boiling. And she said to her, I'm remaining on the fire. And it's true, Shabbat is our fire. If we don't have that fire, we become cold very quickly. But when we have that fire, then we can deal with the hardships of the week. And with the physical, like he speaks about here, with the purpose that we have towards this physical world, towards, the issues of the physical world. But we can only do so if we're connected to the fire of the Shabbat. Let's continue a little bit more. Shabbat is essentially the day of rest. Please.
The Shabbat is essentially the day of rest, of cessation from all labor and creative effort. And this holds true for the spiritual effort of working on oneself, as well as for the physical effort of working on the world. The week is characterized by busyness or activity, while the Sabbath is grounded on stillness, on the nullification of oneself in the downpour of holiness. And this self-repudiation is expressed by a renunciation of all work, whether it be in the physical sense, as being busy in the world, or in the spiritual sense, as engaging in efforts to correct one's soul. In fact, the very power to receive the spiritual essence of the Sabbath comes from one's readiness and ability to surrender, to give up one's human and worldly state for the sake of the supreme holiness, through which all the worlds are raised to a higher level.
Right. Beautifully said. Now, if we are made of body and soul, as we've spoken about so many times, then I would say this: weekdays are dedicated to the body. Shabbat is dedicated to the soul. In order to take care of our soul, we have to disconnect from the body. We have to put the body on strike. Shabbat, the name Shabbat, as we said, means strike. And then we have to focus inward. That's why also, and the Talmud mentions this, that the word for Shabbat, going back to Shin, Bet, Taf, those letters, or also if you flip the letters around a little bit, the same letters for the word Teshuvah, Tashuv. Teshuvah doesn't mean to repent, as is usually translated, but it means to return. On Shabbat, we are meant to go inward. It's two different directions. During the weekdays, you have to go outward. On Shabbat, you have to go inward. Now, if you only go outward and you never go inward, not only do you lose your balance, but you also lose yourself. The only way to enrich yourself, to never lose that self, but quite the opposite, to gain that self, to enhance it, is to stop, to go on strike from that movement outward once a week, and to go back inward, to see who you are, what that fire is. Yes, that's Tashuv. Spiritual work is not Teshuvah. Teshuvah is not spiritual work. Teshuvah, returning to your true self, is not spiritual work. Spiritual work, I would say, is work that deals with, I would say, what we're doing right now. Studying Torah for yourself, by yourself, or with groups, that's fine. But I'm saying having to go out to the world and bring spirituality to the world. That's spiritual work. Feeding the homeless is spiritual work. Might be food, but it's still spiritual work. Doing things that are spiritual in this world is spiritual work. And that's why the word work, I think. But working on ourselves, refining ourselves, that's not spiritual work. That's spirituality, period. I think there's something lost there, but I think that's, again, if it's spiritual work in this world, work, as in work, then it's a problem. But if it's spiritual enhancement, maybe, then that's not work. So you can correct one's soul in many ways. One way of correcting one's soul is through teshuvah, and I don't think that's the way he's referring to, Rabbi Stauns is referring to. I can ask him. We can ask him. But I don't think that's what he's referring to. I think what he's referring to here is by correcting one's soul, by sometimes doing is correcting. When you're engaged with this world, they say that Judaism believes in you are what you do. In other words, deed can make you that deed. So if I do good, I become good. I think that's correct. The correction of one's soul through deed is what is not allowed on Shabbat. It's almost like losing ourselves in God. Every soul is a part of God. When we work out there in the world, we don't really see that connection with God because the world is obstructing it. On Shabbat, we are told, take that soul and fuse it back to its source. Allow God, allow that fire to engulf your little flame. And that flame that gets lost in the fire of God. I think that's what it says here. Now, that's through going inward. That is through going, teshuvah, returning to you, turning to who you truly are. And to be as practical as possible, Jewish law supports exactly what you said. I love that definition. Because you're not allowed to speak about you if you think about it. In Jewish law, you're not allowed to speak about your work on Shabbat. You're not allowed to even speak about your car, your plans, your trip this week. You're not allowed to speak about any factor of your life on Shabbat. The only factor you're allowed to speak about is that soul. That's why, by the way, some have the custom to have what's called a Ta'anit Dibur on Shabbat, which means a fast of speech. They don't speak on Shabbat. The only time they'll speak, of course, is to pray, to say the Kiddush, or to do things that you have to do on Shabbat. But that's because very often our speech leads us to be speaking about things that are us, and that's not allowed on Shabbat. Good, excellent definition. I will say also, what's nice about what he's saying here is that this losing, I know it's almost like a Christian saying, I think, but to lose oneself in God, or to lose ourselves. I think this losing oneself is really, you're not losing yourself. They say to lose yourself in order to find yourself. But lose means that you have to lose control over yourself. I don't think that this is what it's saying, to just fine-tune this a little bit. I think what this is saying is that one has to find the God within. One has to find that soul. So you're not losing yourself, you're actually finding your true self. What you are losing is your fake self. So we have to be careful with that expression. We have to find our true self, but lose our fake self. And when we find our true self, then we'll find that all-encompassing God that engulfs us completely. Because again, our soul is a part of God. You remind me, of something that's very much connected to Shabbat. It's interesting, it's pointed out, I forget where, by one of the Hasidic books, that, we start off the Shabbat with light and we end with Shabbat with light. We start off the Shabbat by lighting Shabbat candles, and we end the Shabbat by lighting the Havdalah candle. What's interesting is that those two lights are a little bit different. When we start off the Shabbat, we light one candle, some light two candles, but it's still two individual candles. When we end the Shabbat, we have to light a candle that has multiple wicks. Otherwise, it's not considered a Havdalah candle. It has to have multiple wicks. So the light that you end the Shabbat with is brighter, is bigger, is larger, is more wicks than the light that you began the Shabbat with. And this has multiple reasons. Number one, because of what you're saying. Our growth has to be one step at a time. First one light, and then two lights, by the way, which is also the message of the Hanukkah candles. One candle, and then two candles, three candles. You can't start playing soccer with 8 candles. You got to start playing soccer with one candle. And then slowly but surely grow. But also what this symbolizes Kabbalistically is beautiful, is exactly what we're saying here, to lose your fake self and find your true self. And that is that you, in order to return, again, Shabbat is about returning to who you are. So in order to return, you have to say, I'm a soul, I'm not a body. During the week, I was a body. Now I'm a soul. That soul, as it says in the book of Proverbs, is a candle of God. Ner Hashem nishmat adam. That's how King Solomon calls the soul, a candle of God. But if you are really, after Shabbat, once you've cultivated that soul, you've also realized that this soul is a part of God. So it's not just one soul anymore, not just one candle. You have multiple candles, you have multiple wicks. Your soul is intricately connected with God. Then by the end of the Shabbat, we hope to realize that we're not alone. There's a fire that we're connected to. That's God. And that is the idea, that's the power, actually, that we bring with us to the rest of the week. The Havdalah candle, when we look at those multiple wicks that are coming together, like my soul coming with God together, and that gives me the strength to then face the weekday and overcome the bodily challenges. But that's right. That's why we start with one wick and we end it with multiple wicks together. Yes, it has to be a minimum of 2, but sometimes, minimum of 2. All connected to each other. So all these wicks intertwined. The souls. There's a beautiful story about Yehuda Avner, who was the personal advisor to 5 Israeli ministers. He wrote a book called The Prime Ministers. It's an incredible book. And you fall in love with Menachem Begin by the end of that book. But he writes so beautifully also. I don't know of anyone who writes so as beautifully as he does, as he did. He passed away a few years ago. But Yehuda Avner tells about his encounter with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, of blessed memory. And he said that he had a private audience with him, and he asked him that towards the end of the audience, Rebbe, what is your role? And the Rebbe said, my role is to light other people's souls. Finally, continued to speak. As he was exiting the room, he asked the Rebbe, have you lit my soul? And the Rebbe said, no, I've only given you a match. It's up to you to light your own soul. And I think that's what God does. He gives us a match. But we have to light our own souls. So the fire has to come from us. But He gives us the wicks, makes them come intertwined with other wicks. A That's why they say that, you just taking that fire into the weekday. There's a lot of details we don't pay attention to, but so we light the Havdalah candle, and then what do we do with it? We extinguish the fire with the wine of the Havdalah. And then what we do is that we take some of the wine, maybe with a pinky or something, and we put it on the neck bone over here. I think there's a medical term for it. On our lids, and put also some wine in the pockets. But the reason you put it in these three places is that, again, you're taking some of the fire and putting it in your body. Now, you bring it to the weekday. But these three places symbolize three unique things. This neck bone is apparently the only bone that doesn't disintegrate. And that's the bone from which God will resurrect us. So we want to be resurrected with the holiness of our souls, with the holiness of Shabbat. And that's why we put some of the wine here. We put it on our eyes, because we have to look at the world with Shabbat eyes. We have to look at the bodily aspect of eyes with soul eyes. That's the only way we don't sink in this world. If we remember to where we came from, remember to be connected to that fire. And then some put in the pockets. Pockets represent the money, the earnings. We want our earnings to be blessed also. So we put that wine in our pockets for the whole cup. You get a little bit sticky. That's correct. But again, that wine is not just the Havdalah blessing. The wine is the fire that we were just speaking about. The idea is to take that fire and somehow infuse it in you. You're not going to do it with a live flame. Good luck with that. So you extinguish it, hoping that some of the fire, or some of the smoke, I suppose, or whatever is left of the fire is in the wine now, that has been spilled. And then you take that wine, that is a mixture of the wine itself, of course, and the fire, and you put it in. You put on those spots. That's a good question. So there's a lot of, why wine? And is there any connection between the wine of Kiddush and the wine of Havdalah and so on? Well, wine first, the simple interpretation is wine is a drink of celebration, right? So we honor the Shabbat by drinking wine, not a cup of Coke. It's more dignified for the Shabbat. That's a simple interpretation. They also say that wine in Hebrew is yain. Okay? If you take the numerical value of yain, you have yud, and the yud is worth 10. So there's two yuds, so you have 20. And then you have nun, which is 50. So that's 70. 70 is 70, right? 7 plus 0 is 7. If you combine the letters, because it's on the seventh day. A lot of actually symbols of the Shabbat have that number 7. For example, take the word dag, which is fish. It's a mitzvah to eat fish on Shabbat. Dag has a numerical value of 7. Dalet is 4 and Gimel is 3, 7. If you take the word candle, ner also is 250. 2 plus 5 plus 0 is 7. So you have a lot of symbols like that. That's from a numerology standpoint, from a Kabbalistic standpoint. And then in addition, wine is also represents alcohol. It says in the Talmud that nichnas yain yitzeh sod. When one drinks wine, secrets come out. And in a way, that's the purpose of Shabbat, as we just spoke about. When you drink wine, we want to focus on the soul. We want to look inward. We want to go to the deeper secrets here. So we drink wine to unlock ourselves, so to speak. And that's done again before Shabbat, during Shabbat, and then at the end of Shabbat, to unlock that soul and then bring it to the weekday with us. You want to make sure that the utensils in which the wine was kept are also kosher utensils, that there's nothing non-kosher touched those utensils or were held in those utensils. Number 2, some wine was also used, at least in times gone by. In India, actually, it still exists. Wine is used for idol worship. Anything that is used for idol worship cannot be used, cannot be consumed, can't be consumed. So we want to make sure kosher wine has supervised to make sure that it's not used for any type of idol worship. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to drink it. That's the second idea about kosher wine. If you're interested in that, I have a brother who represents the OK, the kosher symbol, the OK. And he goes to China and India. He was in Egypt not long ago. He knows all about those things. It's an interesting thing, interesting industry. Chemicals, and you can't believe like the stuff they put in our food. After you listen to him speak, like you don't want to eat anything. Yeah, but you would think that so even things like wine, right, or even water, you think that it's just water, but it's not. The day and age we live in, fruits are just fruits. No, they're not. You know what they coat fruits with? It's like the most. He told me the other day, my brother. It's like the most disgusting. It's poison. If you had big quantities of it, you could die. So you gotta be careful. Okay. Well, I want to thank Gila really for spearheading this class. Each time, no, thank you.